Dungeon Heart is a mobile game in which the player builds and populates a dungeon of their very own. The player does this by accumulating 3 different resources: life energy, gold, and knowledge points, and spends them to purchase rooms in which they place on a grid surrounding their dungeon heart. In this diagram, you can see the player selecting the room that they want, placing it where they want on the grid, and spending the gold in order to place it. The player can then fill these rooms with monsters and traps that over time will generate resources for them. These creatures and traps also serve another purpose, as defense. As the player's dungeon becomes larger, it will begin to be invaded by adventurers. These adventurers will begin trickling in one at a time every 5 minutes and start out as the weakest of 3 different types of adventurers. But as the dungeon becomes larger, the amount that comes in every 5 minutes will increase and become mixed with the 2 other types of stronger adventurers. Though this is not all bad, as every time an adventurer is killed by the traps and creatures of the dungeon, the player is granted a boost in all 3 resources, allowing them to become stronger and larger faster. You can see in this diagram, a player's dungeon is being invaded by an adventurer. The adventurer moves into a room, slays 2 of the player's zombies, and the player clicks to spawn a skeleton. The player spawns the skeleton in the adventurer's room, defeating them and gaining a boost in resources. The player can also use these resources to strengthen their already existing traps and creatures by upgrading them with knowledge points and life essence. You can see here that there's not only a cosmetic difference, but a stat difference in the upgraded creatures. If the player's dungeon is not strong enough to kill the adventurers before they make it to the dungeon heart, then the adventurers will attack it until they are either killed or it is destroyed. This will cause the player's dungeon to shut down for 2 IRL hours whilst it is repaired. Players can alternatively spend stockpiled resources to speed up the repairing process. The theme of this game is a fantasy-like D&D setting, which will give the player their choice of 10 different creatures, 3 different traps, and 5 different aesthetic skins that can be placed on rooms. The goal of this game is primarily to protect your dungeon heart for as long as you can, whilst building the biggest, coolest dungeon the player desires. This game shares similarities between games like Farmville and Dungeon Keeper, with a mix of satisfaction that comes with building a large base like in Farmville, and the stimulation of constantly fighting approaching enemies like in Dungeon Keeper. The features required to make this game are a bit extensive, but we have learned the majority of the skills needed in order to implement them. The game will require many assets, as previously shown, as well as needing an economic system for at least 2 resources, UI menus for purchasing rooms and creatures, a snapping grid for placing rooms around the dungeon heart, a health and damage system, a scoring system, NPC AIs, and a time harvesting system similar to the way crops work in Farmville. The upgrade system is optional, and so is the use of the knowledge point resource, as its primary function is for upgrading creatures. Though there would be many things to do, I feel that we have already learned the skills needed in order to make this game feasible. Thank you for your time, and I hope you consider supporting this pitch.